There you go. Hello, and welcome to Envision's webinar, Innovative Approaches for Modern Compliance and Risk Management. I'm Matthew Medeiros, the Marketing Director, and I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping things first and foremost. For questions, if you're new to Teams, in the there should be a Q&A section up at the top of your screen. If you don't see it, there's the three dots with more. You can click that and head to the Q&A section. That's where I welcome all questions. They are moderated, so they will come to me. So if you don't want to have it publicly posted or anything like that in the chat, I will be more than happy to just leave it anonymous and relay the questions to our presenters here. Other than that, welcome and thank you for joining us, and I hope that you find this very insightful. I'm going to get started here and introduce our two esteemed presenters. As I said, I'm your host, Matthew Medeiros, the Marketing Director, and I'm going to introduce the two presenters. Manuel Lobao, first off, he's a Director of Cybersecurity and Compliance Services here in Envision. With more than 20 years of experience in the technology field, Manny is a leader focused on aligning people, processes, and technology to meet the demand of various clients across multiple regulatory and business verticals. As a certified EC Council instructor, he's created and led trainings to help fill the growing need for experienced security professionals. His passion to learn and help others has led him to being a 2020 Tech 10 Award winner. Also joining us is Nicole Beasley, our lead governance, risk, and compliance in the consulting practice. She's an expert in audits under the SOC framework and provides deep expertise in SOC 1, 2, 3, ISO, HITRUST, and PCI and HIPAA engagements from beginning to completion. Additionally, she has experience in internal audits, risk assessments, control implementation, and SOX 404 control assessments. Now, without further ado, I'm going to let them take the lead on providing all the insightful information today, and then we'll wrap up at the end with some Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. Again, my name is Manuel Lobao, and excited to be here talking about risk and compliance. Obviously, a very exciting topic for all of us, as you can well imagine. But let's talk a little bit about what risk is. And risk is obviously anything that might be a negative approach or negatively happening to our individuals, us individually, or us as a business or an organization. And risk management is all about identifying and understanding those potential risks that could impact our overall operations. One of the major reasons why it's so important, or some of those reasons, is being able to identify a risk early. Businesses can take steps to mitigate risk, potentially prevent significant financial losses. And also understanding the risk associated with certain decisions can help businesses make more informed decisions ahead of time. Instead of always looking in the rear view as to what's already taking place, understanding risk to the organization allows you the ability to make changes and adjustments that are going to mitigate that risk in the future. And then by planning for potential risks, you're ensuring that your future strategies are in place to maintain operations and maximize the finances of the organization. But how does this relate to security and compliance? Well, first and foremost, compliance and security do not equal one another. While compliance can contribute to security, it doesn't guarantee it. A business can be compliant, but still be vulnerable to exploitation. While security and compliance are major building blocks and components of risk management. Risk management involves identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks, which include both security risks and compliance risks. It provides a more holistic approach to protecting a business. It considers all potential risks, not just those covered by compliance standards. Firstly, it also has adaptability. Risk management strategies can be adopted and updated as new risks emerge by ensuring ongoing security and compliance. Compliance standards, in contrast, may not be updated as frequently or may not cover all potential risks. And ultimately, it's cost effectiveness. Implementing a risk management strategy can be more cost effective in the long run, as it can prevent security breaches or compliance violations that can result in financial losses and damages to a business's reputation. By tracking and managing risk, we're able to understand where we are today as a business, where those risks lie, and be able to quantify them both from an impact operationally and an impact fiscally, financially, whether it be through efficiencies in operation or potential loss due to things happening or things getting outside of what we would typically do on a regular basis. Risk gives us that visibility. It's looking through that lens of focus to understand exactly how the business pulse is functioning and working. And the reason we're gathered here today is we'd like to share with you some of the stories that we've had, some of the engagements from our clients throughout the years, and bring forward really just some of the findings on a few key items to really give you a little bit of a focus about how risk can help mitigate the exposure and mitigate the impact of these types of actions. One that comes to mind is one, Nicole, I think you're very familiar with, and that's around vendor risk. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that and maybe a little story from your past.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Beasley, as they've mentioned before. It's wonderful to have you guys here today. What we're going to talk about is vendor risk. And the main thing that I like to tell everyone is just because you have a vendor that has a certification or audit report, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're just good to go. So it's very important to do a couple things, which is, review them, make sure that it's up to what you're expecting and meets the standards of what you require. So an example of that is I received a SOC 2 for one of our clients, vendors. A SOC 2, by the way, if you guys don't know what that is, a SOC is a system and organizational control report, which is a audit report that has three types of opinions that you may get. You may get an unmodified opinion, a qualified opinion, and an adverse opinion. Unmodified means report's good to go, no issues. A qualified opinion means that one of the areas or multiple areas did not exactly meet the overall criteria. An adverse opinion means that the report the auditor could not give an opinion on because there was so much going on or there was so much wrong throughout the audit. For example, I've been doing audits for 8 years and I've issued one adverse opinion, and it was because we were having issues getting evidence from a client. And we had gone for about 2 years before we finally pulled the plug and gave them an adverse opinion. But the main issue there is, right, even if you get an unmodified opinion, there could be testing that may not meet your standards. There could be exceptions in the report still that you won't know if you just say, oh, I've got a clean audit report, we're good. So the main point when you start looking at it is to actually evaluate, your section 3, which is going to give you a description of the client and what it does, and then your section 4, which is going to be your testing. So for example, I was reviewing the SOC 2 report and I saw a vendor risk control, right? And it says, we tested the vendor risk management program, but how they tested it was they reviewed vendor contracts. Well, everyone on the phone knows that just reviewing a contract isn't a full risk assessment. They're not evaluating anything. They're just looking at the contract. So once we received this, we actually followed up with the vendor, had a discussion around their vendor management program, what they actually did and how they performed it, and we're able to clear them up. But the main thing when you're doing this is to build out a vendor management program to cover these types of errors or these types of situations. You want to make sure you're covering all the bases. So a good thing is to build a strong vendor management program that helps you look at the most important parts of your attestation reports or even your certifications just to make sure everything is good to go. The main thing nowadays is that you're just doing a checkbox, right? A lot of people will just say, I got an audit report, I did it, check the box, we're compliant. So if you can make a good, strong management program for your vendors, you won't receive this issue. You can actually have a stronger and better relationship with your vendors and actually have a safer environment. Today, our vendors are clouding a lot of AI integrations, and I'm going to kick it back to Manny to talk about AI risk today.
Oh, Absolutely, no, a great point, and I love what you covered, Nicole. And that's that we get so much of this checkbox mentality. A lot of times, we just assume that if somebody has the rubber stamp or some way that they can show that they've passed a particular certification or a standard, that it's not always just as easy as saying they have it or they don't have it. Right? It's diving in deeper to really get a closer look at things. And I love the transition to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, obviously, it's everywhere. Right? We turn on the news or go to our news feed, and what's amazing is how prevalent it has become. It's something that's growing rapidly, and it's something that a lot of businesses really want to be able to leverage because it's technology that can help simplify things and grow efficiency within our organizations. Something that would typically require a lot of hunting around or understanding how to get at data brings something to the fingertips to the point of being as easy as just asking a question as though you would ask a coworker, using plain English or plain language in order to get to information that typically would be a little bit more difficult to find. Something like an earnings report or information about recapping a recent meeting that you may have been a part of. And where artificial intelligence provides a lot of strength behind that, a lot of capabilities behind it, there's also risk associated with it. AI components, AI technologies such as, say, Copilot from Microsoft or AWS or Google, they provide the ability to look at information not only expressly available on the internet, but when an example of Copilot, you can deploy that Microsoft Copilot into your tenant. And the strength of that is that you now have access to any of the information that you, as an individual, would normally have access to in that tenant. That could be everything from meetings that you've attended, emails, PDFs, Word documents, Excel documents that you've worked on, others have worked on, but you have visibility into. So there's a lot of power in being able to say, what's the Q1 earnings for 2024 for the organization? Where are some information details that we can extrapolate? But the problem and the difficulty, the risk associated with that is ensuring that your business is structured and ready for such a powerful tool. And we've had instances, we work with a client who was very keen on getting into artificial intelligence and deploying Copilot into their tenant environment. And they were able to do so, but didn't do a lot of the due diligence beforehand. What ended up happening was that as going through, when we got involved, we were able to do a level of diligence in testing to see what kind of information would a typical user have access to. And that information included things about the individual account and what meetings they had been a part of. But it also provided the ability to see what's HR working on. Is there anything with what's the CEO of the organization working on? What kind of documents? What kind of emails? What kind of content? And what happens is that if the organization hasn't gone through and put the protections and controls, going through a zero trust engagement, having a control plane engagement with the likes of a company like an Envision, and going in and being able to make sure that the proper authorization and proper tagging of individual files are created in such a way that sensitive information does not become exposed. And the key is this: while the advent of like a copilot of an AI into the organization bubbles this up to the surface, this is exposure that may exist in your environment today. The difference being is that right now it'd be much more difficult to get at that information. An individual would have to know where it is, how to search for it, how to get content within that environment, how to get content within a particular file. But if they have that access, they have the ability to go and get that today. It's just not at your fingertips. It's not so readily available. What a tool like a Copilot does is brings that right up to the surface because it makes it very easily accessible. So the risk here is making sure that you're going through and doing the due diligence to have things like auto tagging, auto initializing to make sure that if a document gets created and that document contains sensitive information, maybe it contains a social security number, a credit card number, any personal information about an employee, a client, a coworker, that information is automatically tagged and it's automatically structured to make sure that that information does not get out and is not readily available and not readily accessible when it shouldn't be to the individuals that shouldn't have access. So again, artificial intelligence is a tremendous tool and a great way of getting at and being able to get to data at your fingertips and being able to be that much more efficient. But there is a structure that you have to follow and make sure that you're mitigating risks as you're going in and doing these types of deployments prior to. And even in the advent of not going into the realm of artificial intelligence and getting that technology implemented, there's still value in going through that process because, as we stated, it's something that's available at their fingertips today. It's just a little bit more difficult to get at if we're not going through these processes. So, as we're talking about artificial intelligence, I'd like to switch it over to human intelligence and hand it back off to Nicole and talk about our next topic.
Yeah. Human intelligence can happen in one of two ways. It can either be a malicious act or a non-malicious act. And what I'm going to talk about is an actual malicious attack that has happened while I was actually in the audit field. So I used to be a financial auditor before I got into the compliance world. And I was auditing an insurance company and I was doing a cash statement. A cash audit should be really easy, should tie out. It's something they give first years to kind of get their foot in the door and kind of learn how to test without stressing you out a little too much. Well, I looked at it for about 2 or 3 hours and I was like, I cannot get this balance. And I finally went to my manager and we were like, no, this is actually correct. It is not balancing, which is a big red flag in the audit world because that's something that is almost always correct. So we then went to the new CFO who had been there for about a month and been like, hey, can you reprint all your bank statements for us and hand those to us? And what we had found out through all of this inquiry and some behind the scenes information was the old CFO was printing bank statements that were changed and altered. She was printing fake invoices and also using the advantage of being with the company for 30 years and having a stamp that had the CEO's name on it. So she was signing both stamps and actually paying herself with the check that should be going to the fake invoices that she was making and getting approved. So throughout the process, within the year, just the year was about $1 million. Over the course of her life with the company, she stole over $50 million from the company. And once we realized all this, we had to do a bunch of things. So we had to scan the checks, find all the fake invoices, show how she was altering the bank statements, and we actually, since I was the one that found it, we had to present it with the sheriff's department in Jackson, Mississippi, which is where I was first working. Um, and it was a very detailed explanation because it's a fraud case. So you have to explain how you found it, what you found. And since I was the one that figured out she was throwing a piece of paper in front of the check and backdating it and then sliding that out and putting her name in, I had to show the sheriff how to do it because I was actually kind of messing around and saying, hey guys, can't we do this? And they're like, there's no way you can do it. And lo and behold, you can actually do it with an old check machine. So that is something that was very malicious. But for most actual human threats, I would say the majority of them are not malicious. And I'm actually going to kick it back to Manny to
Yeah.
talk about an example of a non-malicious human error.
Absolutely. When it comes to insider threat, a lot of times our mind automatically goes to somebody doing something knowingly bad against to benefit themselves or somebody else to the detriment of the company or customers. But in most cases, it comes down to just somebody doing their daily work and not realizing that they may be doing something that might be impacting things in a negative way. A good example that comes to mind is what we call a business email compromise. So that's an example of where somebody were going about their daily business. They may have clicked on a link and they may have given up access unwittingly or unknowingly to a bad actor into their email account. And what's happened is we had an example of a law office who handles home purchases. And what they do is they will handle transactions. Those transactions will be from somebody putting a down payment. They'll do a wire transfer, and it gets held into an escrow account that's under the guise or under the auspice of the legal office to distribute funds out where it belongs. Well, what happened is that a bad actor got in the middle of the communication between the law office and a buyer for a property. And what happened is the bad actor took the opportunity because they had access to go ahead and send the customer, the buyer, an email that said it's time to do your wire transfer. Here's the wire transfer information. Only the information didn't send it to the escrow account for law office. It sent it to the bad actor's account. And in the example of most recently that I've been a part of, it was to the tune of over $400,000 in transaction for a property purchase. Required obviously a lot of effort and a lot of legal involvement in order to revert that back. But that's the type of innocent insider threat that can happen. Somebody going about their regular operation, not realizing what's taking place. And this can start to happen behind the scenes. And that's the type of item that you really want to have be focused on, is being able to have tools in place to look for this type of a non-standard activity that could result in this. Things like rules suddenly spontaneously appearing in an email box, logins that are taking place disparately from someplace on the other side of the globe, disparately from where someone normally would log into. These types of little key markers start to uncover a footprint of potential activity that can draw attention to it. So again, when we think about insider threat, we want to have our dedicated processes so that in the example that Nicole gave, there should be an authorization process to make sure those types of transactions are being checked and double checked by multiple people. And there shouldn't be an easy way of one person being in control of all the keys. The same way when doing any of that through via an email or regular work communications is having that ability to see when things start to fall outside of the typical workflows. And that's where insider threat becomes so prevalent. Those were some of the topics that we wanted to talk to. We wanted to do just a quick recap and just open it up to really questions. And first and foremost, we talked about our vendor risk. We talked about how our third parties and our vendors are going to be impacting and affecting us, how risk lies there. We talked about how artificial intelligence can be a great tool, but it can also have risks associated with it. And we want to make sure that we're putting the controls in place for it. And then finally, we talked about insider threat and how it can be either malicious or innocent, but it's still a threat to the organization. And there are tools out there and there are methods that we can put in place and that we can assist with to be able to bubble these to the surface. But at this point in time, we'd love to hand it back off to Matthew and obviously take any questions that you might have, see how we can help.
Yes, thank you so much, guys. Actually, we already have one question, which is something that was on my mind as well. So that's a nice coincidence here. And the question is, why is it important to perform a vendor risk assessment every year?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
You want this one, Nicole?
Absolutely. It's so important to review vendors every year because things change. Processes change, controls change, technology changes, right? So if you think about it, your vendor is potentially going to change their controls, policies, or even a new tool, right? People like to use tools that going to make them more secure, and you want to make sure that as they make these changes, we're reviewing and understanding those changes, because the last thing we want to do is have someone that had a clean report, let's say in 2023, and their 2024 report is qualified or adverse. That's a big change, right? As someone reviewing a vendor, and it's very important to get an understanding of the vendors, and that's why it's good to do a yearly vendor assessment. Manny, do you have anything else
Yeah,
you'd like to
no,
add?
absolutely. No, that's a great point, Nicole. And I mean, we talked about it, and as you reviewed it, you can have a SOC 2 compliance where you've gone through it and maybe you've done the due diligence, but that report gets renewed on a regular basis. And maybe that level of diligence hasn't been applied every time. And when that kind of stamp comes through to say they've gone through their SOC 2, having that level of validation to make sure that they're going through, keeping up on it, and making sure that it's standard and compliant and it's current is an important aspect. That means that it's a constant check and balance of making sure that they're adhering to everything that it was at the time where they first got approved. Changes happen all the time, like you said, sometimes daily, never mind going through potentially monthly or years later.
Thank you,
Awesome.
guys. Thank you,
Anything
guys.
else, Matt?
Yeah, we have one more question here about understanding risk itself. So how can I, really know that employees aren't at risk when with this age of AI and well, really AI, when it's gone beyond phishing emails now. And this
Yeah.
one goes into the deep fakes, which there was a big news article about I'm going to recap this a little bit. There was, a CEO to call deep fake CEO video chatted with a CFO that wired a bunch of money, right? In the millions of dollars. So how can we really know that employees aren't at
Yeah.
risk in this world of AI and deep fakes when we know it's hard to tell what is really real anymore? We've trained a lot on phishing emails and how can we do this now? So
Absolutely. I think that the key is to your point, things like generative AI and deep fakes are becoming much more prevalent. They're going to only continue to get better. It's going to get closer and closer and more hard to distinguish a deep fake from reality. In the event of a session like this, just knowing that all the participants are actually legitimate people and not something that's generated by a computer. The best defense we can have is right now there are some telltale signs, little things you can see, such as things not being quite right, the eyes or facial expressions, but those are going to be harder and harder over time to discern. The best defense we can have in place is have a stepping workflow process authorization for any information related to personal identifiable information, sensitive details. Anytime there's a financial transaction, or there needs to be a workflow process that goes through multiple hands. It can't be something that we state we do as an organization, and then when a C-suite person comes along and pounds on the desk and yells and screams, we just go ahead and bypass that process. We can't have that level of weakness. We have to have a structure in place that allows a level of authorization to take place so that when a request comes in, the personnel that are executing on it, it doesn't get finalized until there's authorization at each step. It becomes a bit onerous, but it's the level of protection we need to have in place to be able to get around the ability for someone to just send a text message, pick up the phone, and you're listening on the phone call, and it may sound like the person that you think you're talking to, because it's getting to the point where it's becoming more and more difficult to tell the difference. So a set workflow, a set methodology, and then not being able to subvert it or change it just on the whim of, somebody saying, well, this one needs to be quick, so we're going to skip all of these steps in order to get to the end. We have to be diligent in that. And Nicole, is there any thoughts?
I think processes like you're saying is great, but also you can do a couple things, right? Having a good risk assessment program, right? Checking the overall risk of the employees, making sure that people are aware of what to look for. And if you have good processes, if you do a risk assessment, you can really kind of like get a feel for if maybe someone is maybe missing a step or maybe a little bit more vulnerable. Not maybe even due to their own, maybe they, do something that you think is totally normal, but I love to say, I when I was auditing, there was a little admin lady that worked at the front desk of the bank, and she had all of her passwords underneath her keyboard. I obviously do not have mine. But she didn't think she was doing anything malicious, right? But she had access to a ton of stuff. So if anyone really wanted to, they could go and flip it up. So there's a little bit of a risk, but it just was super easy. We talked to her about what the risk was, and she was like, "Oh, okay, cool, got it." Pulled them off and got rid of them. But little things like that will help. Checking the actual processes through a risk assessment, doing some internal audits, and just making sure your processes are following what they should. Because the more you practice and the more you put effort into that, the less likely you're going to have someone be able to rattle the cage, right? So that's my
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, because I think a lot of us, we all want to get the job done. And if we don't have a direction on how to perform a specific action, we'll find a way to make it work. And when we start to get into those gray areas, that's where we start to get into danger. We start to introduce risk into the organization. The more we can eliminate those gray areas, and a risk assessment's a great way of starting to uncover those types of gray areas, and being able to fill those in are going to help mitigate those risks for any of those potential vectors.
Great. We have another question as well. Is it realistic to expect all vendors to carry cyber liability insurance, or is that an uncommon coverage?
So, do you have an opinion, Nicole?
I know
I
you
have
do.
an opinion.
I know you do.
Maybe you and I were talking about cyber insurance the other day. Actually, this is
absolutely
coincidental.
As someone that was in the audit industry, and I would say it's important to have cyber liability insurance. Now, as if it's someone that's like, we talk about different tiers of your vendor, right? If it's someone like the water cooler, someone's bringing your water cooler in, I'm not so sure I'm concerned about them having cyber liability insurance. But if it's like your cloud hosted provider, I would hope that they have cyber liability insurance. I know it is a little bit of a hot topic. Some vendors may not want to share that with you, But if they're getting any type of attestation report, someone's reviewing it. Hopefully they'll give it to you. Manny, did you have anything that you thought as well
Yeah,
about
no,
that?
absolutely not. I think you made a great point. I think the level, when we have vendors, we're going to have a level of risk associated with each vendor. And to your point, if you have somebody that's providing a very minor, non-technical, maybe they don't have any access to any sensitive information, that stringent review isn't nearly as high as somebody that, to your point, be your cloud provider. If they're hosting data on your behalf, if it becomes a mission critical part of your organization, if it's something that's classified as that higher critical risk to your business, if that vendor would have interrupted service, then absolutely it should be a part of that risk management process. And the major reason being this: if you have an organization where you're reliant upon them being functional in order for your business to be functional, then that risk is so high such that if something were to happen, let's say they ran into a cyber incident, a ransomware attack, hopefully we'll knock on wood everywhere that nobody on this call suffers when in now or in the near future. But what'll happen is it's so disruptive to services and so costly to come back from that not having cyber liability insurance can result in sometimes to organizations not being able to continue, meaning that some organizations will go out of business because they don't have either the funding, the capability, or the structure in place in order to rebound from that. What cyber liability insurance will do is provide that level of coverage where they'll bring in the personnel necessary, they'll bring in the resources necessary as part of that coverage in order to get that organization secure back on their feet from the original impact, the original issue. And it'll shorten that window to do so. So the combination of whether an organization can recover from a cyber incident and whether they can do so in a short period of time for a mission critical vendor relationship needs to be table stakes that is in place. Because if your organization that you're working with that's critical doesn't have their eye on security as a business, and part of that is that insurance coverage, then really you have to take a step back and ask the question, is this the right vendor at the right time doing the right business with your organization today? Or should there be conversations about potentially either them adjusting or growing as an organization, or looking at potentially other vendors in its entirety? So I would say, to great point, Nicole, is that to the point of the criticality of the vendor, that's going to be the biggest component.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. We're kind of at the end here, so if there's any last minute questions, please get them in. I don't see any more, so I might just wrap this up. And so I just wanted to leave everybody with a big thank you, first of all, for attending and listening, or if you've come back for the recording and listened in as well, thank you so much for tuning in. And I just want to let everybody know that every business is different, every goal, every situation is different, no matter if you're in the same industry or not. And risk is, as Manny and Nicole talked about, risk is it changes. It changes year to year. It can change often. So if you're looking to maybe assess your situation, learn a little bit more about one-on-one about what we've talked about, please, these scan codes at the bottom here are ways to get in touch with us, and we'll happily get set up a meeting with you guys. And if the scan code's not working too, I'm going to drop a link in the chat as well, so you can book some time with us and learn more about some risk management strategies that might help your business. Again, everyone's different. There's individual goals and risks associated with every business, no matter the industry. Even if they're two similar competitors in the same industry, they could have different situations, and sometimes chatting through some of that is the best approach. So please reach out, book some time with us, and Manny and Nicole will be happy to help and talk through some ways to manage that. And if there's nothing else, I think that's great. And thank you so much again. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.